You were taught to run from your darkness, to hide everything you feel too much, desire too much, or question too much, and to wear a well-behaved mask and call it self-awareness. But what if I told you that this very shadow, the side you try so hard to avoid, actually holds the purpose of your life? What you hide is what connects you. What you reject is what calls you. Carl Jung said that light only emerges when the shadow is seen. And perhaps the reason you're suffering isn't that you're lost, but that you're ignoring the most authentic part of yourself. The anger you swallow, the neediness you pretend not to have, and the fear of simply being who you are form the densest layer of your soul, and it's within that layer that the self is trying to be born. You won't find this path by trying to appear strong, spiritual, or evolved, but by stopping, turning around, and truly looking. If part of you is tired of pretending, performing, and constantly adapting, then this is for you. And before we go further, I'll ask you to do something simple yet symbolic. Subscribe to the channel now, because here we don't teach you to be better, we teach you to be whole. Here, you'll remember who you are, and you'll understand that your pain is not a failure, but a portal. If you've subscribed, great. Now take a deep breath, because the journey that starts here is not for everyone. It's for those ready to stop running and finally come home. Sometimes she doesn't even realize it, but she behaves exactly like the woman who hurt her the most. She suppresses her own desires, erases herself in the presence of others' affection, and demands perfection from herself in everything, as if she were being punished every time she dared to rest. This is not a coincidence, it's emotional survival. Many people, in an unconscious attempt to avoid the pain they experienced with their mothers, end up internalizing that same mother. They become what they once feared, not by choice, but because the psyche, as Jung taught, builds its defenses from what it knows. If the pain was shaped by control, she will control. If it was shaped by silence, she will silence herself. If it was shaped by constant demands, she will demand. Always more, always too much. Without realizing it, she carries her mother's persona like a psychic armor that was once useful, but now only weighs her down. The cruelest part is that no one sees it. Society applauds the daughter who handles everything, takes care of everyone, and never complains, but inside, she is suffocating. A silent shadow is forming. The part of her that was never allowed to exist. The part that wants to scream, cry, rest, and can't. That's where shadow work begins. It's not just about identifying the pain caused by the mother, but recognizing the mother you became in order to endure what she couldn't be. For example, do you constantly judge yourself for not being good enough? Perhaps you're still trying to be the mother she needed, instead of the woman you truly are. Deep spirituality invites us to see this without guilt for repeating it, and without guilt for wanting to change. At this point in the journey, the ego is no longer the enemy. It becomes the bridge. It reveals with clarity the structure that was built to sustain the functional self, but it also exposes how disconnected that self is from the soul. Behind emotional efficiency, there is exhaustion, and behind that exhaustion, there is a child who only wanted to be loved without having to become her own mother. Individuation begins here, when you stop acting out of reflex and start acting by choice. And for that, courage is required, the courage to ask the questions no one else has asked. Am I living as myself, or as who I learned to be to survive? If you want to apply this today, start small. Take a piece of paper and write down the 3 behaviors you most often repeat when you're under stress. Then ask yourself, did my mother do this too? The answer might hurt, but it opens the first crack in the wall of your emotional prison. Deep down, this is what we all seek: freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever we want, but the freedom to stop repeating what once wounded us. The mother you became served a purpose. She protected, organized, and ensured your emotional survival during difficult times. But maybe now it's time to let her rest, to send her back to the past where she belongs, with gratitude, yes, but also with firmness. Because another part of you is asking for space, a part that has never had a voice, that doesn't know how to pretend, that doesn't want to please, and that refuses to repeat. That part is your true self, and it will only emerge when the armor starts to crack. For many people, love never came as shelter. It came as demand. From an early age, she realized that to be loved, she had to do something, be sweet, be quiet, be smart, be strong. It was never just her, it was always her plus something else. And when love becomes a transaction, the soul learns to distrust tenderness. The child who only wanted to be held begins to realize that this embrace has a price. To avoid losing the little affection she receives, she starts molding herself again and again until what remains is no longer love, but strategy. It's an unconscious attempt to preserve the bond at any cost. At that point, love stops being a language and becomes armor. She smiles to please, takes care of others before herself, and accepts everything without complaint. If anyone asks, she insists she's fine, because she's programmed to appear strong even when she's crumbling inside. Jung taught that what we refuse to face becomes our destiny. In this case, the destiny is to live in relationships where intimacy is always partial, where she loves but with reservations, never allowing herself to be completely vulnerable because deep down she still believes love can hurt. She fears that if she shows her true self, she will be rejected, so she prefers to control, to anticipate abandonment rather than be surprised by it. She would rather seem cold than risk being hurt. This is where the ego steps in, wearing that coldness as protection. It says, "No one can affect me," when in reality everything hurts. It says, "I don't need anyone," when in truth she's terrified of being alone. This is a sophisticated defense, built over years and reinforced by every moment when trusting was dangerous. Her persona has learned to survive by not feeling too much. But this survival comes at a high price, emotional, relational, and spiritual. Love that is perceived as a threat can't flourish. It becomes an emotional battlefield where everything must be monitored, what is felt, what is said, and how much is given. True spirituality, the kind that speaks to the soul rather than to a spiritualized ego, invites us to look at this with compassion, without guilt for having protected ourselves, but also without justifications for staying imprisoned. One practical exercise is to notice how you react to spontaneous affection. When someone compliments you, do you accept it or justify it? When someone takes care of you, do you allow it or rush to reciprocate? These micro-responses reveal unconscious patterns more deeply than they seem. Start paying attention. And if you want to go further, write yourself a letter about the last time you felt truly loved, and ask, did I actually allow myself to feel it, or did I just perform safety? Shadow work begins here, when you realize your greatest pain may be disguised as self-sufficiency. Loving requires risk, lowering your guard, and above all, recognizing that you are afraid to love. Yes, you are afraid, and that's okay. The work now is to reconnect with the part of you that learned to confuse love with vigilance. Jung spoke about shadow integration as an essential step toward individuation. And in this case, integrating the shadow means looking at the armor and understanding why it was created, then slowly allowing it to loosen, not out of obligation, but because you deserve it. You deserve a love that doesn't need to protect you from anything, a love that feels like home, like a deep breath, not a trench. But to get there, you need to take one more step, to look at what lies beyond that armor. And sometimes what lies beyond is anger. She grew up hearing that she had to be a good girl, that an obedient child doesn't cry loudly, doesn't talk back, and doesn't cause trouble. The best daughter, she was told, is the one who understands everything, even the things she should never have had to understand. And so she did. She understood that to be loved, she needed to stay quiet, that showing anger was ugly, that saying, "This hurt me," was a sign of ingratitude. Slowly, she molded herself into a sweet, polite, spiritual girl, one everyone praised, while secretly swallowing her tears. The problem is that over time, this silence turned into poison. Her soul began to grow sick from the absence of truth. Anger, forbidden from coming out, went into hiding, and as Jung taught, whatever is repressed becomes shadow, and the shadow always demands its price. One day, seemingly out of nowhere, she explodes over something trivial. On another day, she feels a nameless anguish. The root lies far back in the place where she learned that being good was the only way to survive. No one can survive being good all the time, especially when being good means denying one's emotions. Anger is not the enemy of spiritual growth. It's part of being human. But the good daughter learned to reject it, confusing anger with cruelty and intensity with loss of control. To be accepted, she began to erase herself. In every relationship, she gave more than she could. In every conversation, she stayed silent to avoid conflict. And when someone asked if she was okay, she smiled. But the body never lies. It began to scream where the soul had gone quiet, manifesting in physical pain, emotional exhaustion, and breakdowns. Poorly digested spirituality teaches that feeling anger is a step backward, but Jung said that illuminating the shadow is the only way to integrate the self. In this case, the shadow hides behind virtue. The good daughter who never feels anger is the same one who abandons herself to please others. Healing begins with the acknowledgement, yes, I feel anger, and that doesn't make me less spiritual. It makes me human. Recognizing this without guilt is already an emotional revolution. Anger is an alert that a boundary, a desire, or a value has been crossed. Feeling it doesn't mean attacking the world. It means learning to listen to yourself. A practical exercise is to set aside 20 minutes a week to write down, without filters, everything that makes you angry, and then read it aloud, noticing what it's like to hear your own truth. Another is active movement. Put on intense music and let your body move freely, letting it express what your mind senses. Shadow work is also about giving space to what's been repressed, without judgment. Only those who feel their own anger can truly understand compassion. The good girl persona doesn't need to be destroyed, but it needs to be redefined so that the love she gives no longer comes from a wounded place. In the end, what this daughter needs is not more praise, but permission. Permission to say no without guilt, to disagree without losing love, to exist without justifying herself. Because as long as she believes she can only be loved by being perfect, she will remain imprisoned in an image, not in her true essence. Jung described individuation as the return to the true center of being, and no woman can reach that center if she continues to put out her own fire. The anger she feels is not a spiritual flaw, it's a psychic compass, telling her, I exist, I feel, I matter too. When that anger is finally heard, it stops being destructive and becomes creative. It begins to open paths. And perhaps after so many years of repression, what this daughter needs most is to hear a new truth, that she doesn't need to heal anyone, least of all her mother. She needs to heal herself from the belief that she can only be free if the other changes first. There is a seductive illusion on the path of self-knowledge, the belief that we can only truly heal when the person who hurt us acknowledges what they did. We tell ourselves we need an apology, a symbolic gesture, or a concrete change from them, as if our relief were in the hands of the one who caused the wound. Without realizing it, we remain trapped in the same cycle of emotional dependence, only now disguised as spiritual growth. The adult daughter goes to therapy, studies spirituality, reads Jung, but still unconsciously waits for her mother to change, to one day say, "Now I understand what I did to you." In reality, most mothers don't change, not because they are cruel, but because they are trapped in their own shadows. And while we wait, we delay our own freedom, telling ourselves, "I can only live in peace once she transforms." But what if that transformation never comes? What if your mother continues as she always has, without revelations, without deep conversations, without apologies? Here lies the turning point. You don't need her healing to access your own. Your soul is not indebted to hers. Your process is yours alone, and it begins when you stop outsourcing your liberation. Jung said the hero's journey is solitary, and in this case the hero does not defeat external monsters, but the internal illusion that they must fix the world around them before they can breathe. You can love your mother if that's what you choose, but loving does not mean continuing to wait for the embrace that never came, the recognition that never happened, the care that was missing. Love that depends on return is still neediness. And spiritualized neediness is one of the most powerful emotional prisons for seekers. In practice, this changes everything. When you understand that your healing depends on no one but yourself, something within you begins to reconfigure. You stop repeating phrases like, "She did the best she could," just to convince yourself you've forgiven. And instead, you start saying, "I don't need to justify what hurt me in order to set myself free." True spirituality is a path of emotional self-responsibility. A helpful exercise is to make a list of everything you still wish your mother would say or do. Be honest. Then go through it item by item and ask, if this never happens, will I still be stuck here? If the answer is yes, then ask, what part of me is still making this a condition for peace? The ego loves to build conditions, but the self, the whole authentic self, knows that healing comes when you stop making your pain a negotiation with the past. This is not a cold process. It's deeply emotional. Releasing this expectation also means releasing the child who believed she had to fix everything to deserve love. It's allowing that child to rest. Jung called this an archetypal transition, the moment when we stop being wounded children and begin to become caretakers of ourselves. You don't need to be indifferent to your mother's pain, but you do need to stop drowning in it. Often, the urge to heal the other hides a deeper fear of facing your own wound. And perhaps what you're feeling now isn't compassion for her, but guilt for allowing yourself to move forward first. But what if that guilt is just another chain? What if, deep down, all you need right now is not to change anyone else, but to rescue yourself from an invisible loyalty? There is a nearly unspeakable pain in the individuation process, realizing that the mother you dreamed of never existed, at least not in the way your soul needed. And perhaps she never could have existed, not out of malice, but out of limitation, emotional, historical, ancestral. Many mothers couldn't offer affection because they never received it. They couldn't nurture because they were never nurtured themselves. This doesn't justify the wound, but it does explain part of the emptiness. The problem is that for years you waited for her to change, to see you, to finally become the mother you had imagined so vividly. But that day never came, and it never will. This is where symbolic grief begins, grieving the idealized mother. Jung said there is no growth without loss. And perhaps the first great loss on your spiritual journey is this: burying what never happened but was so deeply longed for. No one teaches you how to mourn something that never existed. The world validates visible grief, death, separation, physical absence, but not the grief for emotional absence, for the embrace that never came, for the "I love you" that was never spoken, for the conversation you rehearsed countless times but never had. It's a silent grief, but a deep one, and if it's not lived, it turns into anger, resentment, and anxiety disguised as control. This is why so many women feel a vague sense of unease, as if something is always missing, even when everything appears to be in place. It's not neediness, it's unacknowledged grief. The ego tries to compensate by being strong, rational, and functional, but the self knows. There is a part of you still sitting at the top of the stairs, waiting for a mother who will never come. That part will only grow up when you have the courage to say, I accept that this never happened, but I will not keep waiting. This moment is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of liberation, because as long as you keep alive the illusion that one day she will change, you will remain tied to a timeline that doesn't exist. Jung said the unconscious is timeless, and so, where there is no mourning, there is repetition. You keep searching for the mother in other people, in your partner, your therapist, your friends, but none of them can fill that role because they are being asked to provide something that can only be healed internally. So what do? You ritualize the grief. Write a letter to this idealized mother, thanking her for what she symbolized, then burn it. Create a symbolic altar and bury there what never came. Allow yourself to cry, not for what you lost, but for what you never had. It's a solitary gesture, but a powerful one, and more common than you might think. This pain isn't just yours, it's collective. It's an archetype of an entire generation of women who grew up taking care of those who couldn't take care of them. And when you begin to live this grief, something both magical and difficult happens. You start to see your mother as she is. Not as a villain, not as a heroine, but as a woman with wounds, traumas, and repetitions of her own. A woman who perhaps also waited for a mother who never came. This doesn't erase your pain, but it restores it to its true size. You stop expecting healing from someone still unhealed. Stop asking for presence from someone who never learned how to stay. And in that moment, something in you lets go. The child who was waiting begins to grow, not because she has been healed, but because she has been seen by you. And maybe then, for the first time, you can look at your mother and say, I understand, and because I understand, I will do things differently. But to truly do things differently, you'll need to revisit another invisible point. The lie you told yourself just to keep belonging. Every child needs to believe they are loved, even when they're not, even when affection comes loaded with demands, absence, or even emotional harm. To preserve this belief, the mind learns to lie to itself. It's not her fault. I'm just too sensitive. If I behave, she'll like me. These sentences may have seemed harmless in childhood, but they became unconscious psychic codes. Jung called them ego defense mechanisms, strategies designed to prevent the child from collapsing emotionally. The problem is that these lies survive and grow with you. One day you're 30 or 40 years old, still justifying the pain, still telling yourself the same story you told at 7. But now, instead of protecting you, that story imprisons you. Worse still, many of these lies have become part of your identity. The daughter who once said, she loves me, she just doesn't know how to show it, became the woman who accepts emotional crumbs. The one who said, she's only like this because she's tired, became the adult who always understands others, but is rarely understood herself. These patterns are invisible but powerful. When the mind doesn't want to face pain, it adapts to it. And the price of that adaptation is disconnection from the self. You stop listening to yourself, stop trusting your intuition, stop validating your own anger, because deep down, you're still trying to maintain a bond with an internal mother who only accepts you if you are obedient, functional, and perfect. Shadow work is also about finding these internal narratives you created to survive and having the courage to question them. What if it wasn't true? What if I only repeated it to avoid feeling alone? What if I deserved more but didn't know it? Superficial spirituality says, accept everything with love? Deep spirituality asks, are you accepting out of love or out of fear of breaking the image of the mother you invented to avoid suffering? These are difficult questions, but they free you. Jung said healing begins when the internal lie is confronted with awareness. This isn't about accusing anyone, it's about liberation. A practical exercise is to write down the sentences you use to repeat about your childhood, then rewrite each one from your adult truth. For example, she always wanted the best for me could become, she did what she could, but she often hurt me, and I have the right to feel that. You don't need to destroy your mother's memory, but you do need to stop lying to protect a bond that no longer feels true. The protection has become a prison, and in that moment of clarity, something inside you both breaks and comes together. The illusion shatters, and your truth takes shape, because when you admit you've lied to yourself, you finally make room to feel the real pain, not the shaped, justified, or spiritualized version, but the raw, unedited, legitimate pain. And that pain is yours, and only you can hold it. When you do, something precious happens. The need to beg for love dissolves, as if a voice inside you says, I don't need to deceive myself to belong anymore. That's when a new stage begins, the stage where you stop asking and start choosing. There comes a moment with no date, no ceremony, no witnesses, a moment that happens in the silence of your soul after countless attempts, invisible rejections, and disguised pleas for love. It's the moment when your inner child, exhausted from begging, simply stops. And in that exact instant, she grows up, not by choice, but by weariness. She stops knocking on the door that never opens, stops offering her heart, hoping someone will hold it with care, stops wearing the costume of the perfect daughter, the available woman, the rational adult. Jung said true rebirth only happens after a symbolic death, and this day is one of those deaths. The death of the childish hope that the love you wanted would come exactly as you imagined. It didn't come, and in that second, something inside you stopped asking. But this didn't make you colder. It made you clearer, more honest, more whole. For the first time, you no longer needed to beg for affection to feel alive. For the first time, you realized the value you had been waiting to hear from your mother could come from your own silence. It was there, between one wave of exhaustion and another, that self-acceptance was born. Not the self-help version, but the kind that emerges when the ego finally surrenders. You understand that no one is coming to rescue you, that the symbolic, idealized, magical, perfect mother does not exist. And that's okay, because now you know how to mother yourself. Transformative spirituality is not the one that fills you with pretty words, but the one that returns to you the autonomy to love without permission, to comfort yourself without an emotional contract, to exist without apologizing for it. That day, the day you stopped asking for love, has no fireworks, but it has peace. At first, it's a strange, even uncomfortable peace, because you've grown used to the ache of longing, to being the one who pleads, who waits, who adapts. When you stop, you feel alone, as if the emptiness is louder, but it's just the silence of your soul reorganizing itself, like a house that's been closed for too long and needs to breathe. And in that silence, you start to hear another voice, one that's always been there but was drowned out by the noise of others. A voice that says, I know who you are, I know what you've been through, and I'm going to love you in a way no one ever knew how. That voice is yours, the self-awakening, the beginning of true spiritual love, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone's response, the kind born from the end of illusion. From here, something shifts. You're no longer drawn to those who ignore you, no longer chasing the impossible, no longer confusing intensity with abandonment. You're not trying to prove you're worthy anymore. You know you are. Jung said the soul can only blossom when the effort to be accepted stops, and that blossoming begins when you stop asking. not out of pride, but from emotional maturity. The woman who emerges after this isn't cold, she's free. And perhaps for the first time, she can look at her own story without needing it to change, without needing anyone to come back, without needing her mother to see her. Because now what matters is not who left, but who stayed. And the one who stayed was you. But before this blossoming can fully happen, you may have to face another pain, the ancestral feminine wound, the spiritual hunger passed down through generations. She took care of everything, the house, the work, the children, the bills, and the unspoken pain. She was strong, too strong, but her eyes carried a void, her gestures a heavy silence, as if she were alive and absent at the same time. The daughter felt it, even if she couldn't explain it. The mother was there, but something in her had left long ago. Jung said that when an archetype is broken, the unconscious calls for repair. And when the archetype of the mother is wounded, it becomes a psychic absence, even with physical presence. A mother disconnected from her own soul cannot guide her daughter to hers. Before she was a mother, she was a woman. Before she was a woman, she was a soul. And that soul had been forgotten, erased by generations of repression, guilt, silence, and exhaustion. She had inherited a mutilated feminine, and without knowing it, she passed it on. The daughter grew up feeling the weight her mother carried but couldn't name. She sensed something sacred was being betrayed every day, in the way her mother erased herself, swallowed her anger, punished herself for wanting more. This wasn't just about the absence of affection, it was about the absence of presence. The mother was so busy surviving that she forgot to be. And the daughter, seeing this, learned that to be a woman was to be silent, to be a mother was to sacrifice, to have desires was dangerous. Spirituality was replaced by obligation, care by guilt, silence by rule, and the soul went into hiding. The feminine ego was molded to serve, not to feel. Jung warned that repressing the feminine creates collective psychic imbalance, and today thousands of women carry wounds that are not only personal but transgenerational. Wounds of a feminine that was never allowed to bloom. Yet the sensitive daughter notices. She notices that something is wrong. The body aches, cycles are disrupted, affection doesn't flow. She feels the sacred within herself has been forgotten. She resents her mother for not showing the way, for being an example of captivity instead of freedom. But beneath that resentment is pain, the pain of not being guided, of not learning to love her own body, trust her intuition, recognize herself as a temple. The sacred feminine isn't an abstract idea, it's in everyday gestures, in caring without erasing yourself, in setting boundaries without guilt, in consoling without self-denial. When the daughter realizes her mother never touched this place, she understands she will have to rebuild it from scratch, becoming the first in her lineage to remember. That is sacred, and it is also lonely. Because the one who remembers what has been forgotten carries both the weight of healing and the privilege of reconstruction. Jung said every individuation process requires a symbolic rite of rupture, and here that rite is to break with the erased woman in order to be reborn as a whole one. You can honor your mother without repeating the wounded feminine she inherited. You can cry for her, feel for her, but afterward you must choose for yourself. Reconnecting with the sacred feminine begins when you look inward and ask, what part of me still believes that being a woman means erasing myself? That question is a portal, because from there you no longer need to ask for healing. You can embody it. But before that, you'll have to revisit the simplest, hardest gesture in your story. Letting go of the embrace that never came. For years, she believed everything could be resolved with one gesture, an embrace. A sincere, lingering embrace with the scent of safety and the silence of understanding, one that would say what was never said, heal the harsh words, and restore lost love. That embrace became a symbol of everything that was missing and everything that was dreamed. Jung said symbols carry more truth than 1,000 words, and this embrace was more than a gesture. It was the totem of a hope. A legitimate, childlike hope that, over time, became a burden, because it never came. The waiting became a prison, the search an obsession, the lack an identity. Life was suspended, as if it couldn't begin until the past was different. One day she realizes, maybe while looking in the mirror, maybe in the quiet of an ordinary night, that she has spent more time waiting for the embrace than living her own story. And in that second, with no applause or witnesses, something shifts. She understands she doesn't need that embrace anymore. Not because she's cold, but because she's whole. Because she has learned to comfort herself in ways no one ever taught her. True spirituality doesn't give you the past back, it gives you sovereignty. And sovereignty begins when you stop pleading for affection from those who never knew how to love. That is the turning point. The soul no longer negotiates for crumbs, no longer reads into silences, no longer seeks understanding from those who never wanted to understand. Because now she has herself. And that changes everything. Without that expectation, the ego releases its grip. The persona no longer has to pretend to be strong. The body no longer carries that chronic tension in the chest. The heart breathes freely because it understands that what it longed for from someone else already exists within. Shadow work is also this: letting go of the most beautiful illusion to live the hardest truth. It wasn't fair, it wasn't easy. But it's over. The mother who didn't embrace you will not embrace you. The past will not be rewritten. That doesn't mean you are condemned. It means it's now up to you. Spiritual maturity begins at this point, when you choose to live the present, even with empty hands. Because maybe the embrace your soul needed most was the one you never knew how to give yourself. Then, in the middle of an ordinary day, brushing your teeth, washing the dishes, staring at the ceiling, you feel it. Something inside has settled, as if the echo of neediness has quieted, as if the silent cries of the child have finally been heard, not by her, not by your mother, but by you. Jung said only what is consciously acknowledged can be healed, and now you are conscious, awake, standing tall. The pain hasn't disappeared, but it no longer commands you. The love that was missing has been redefined, and the embrace that never came has become an inner gesture, the symbolic touch of a soul that chose to stop waiting. Because deep down, you always knew, freedom doesn't come from the one who embraces you. It comes from the one who lets go. So tell me, how many times have you tried to fix yourself just to be accepted? How many times have you tried to become more spiritual, to escape your own pain? The truth is simple, but brutal. Healing isn't in the light you show, but in the shadow you hide. It's in the part of yourself you learned to deny, the part now begging to be heard. So answer honestly, what are you still trying to hide from yourself? What pain are you still calling an exaggeration? What pattern are you repeating, thinking it's destiny, when it's really just emotional loyalty? Write it down, because sometimes the only thing you need to start freeing yourself is to give voice to what you've never dared say out loud. And if this has reached you, if some part of you trembled at what you've just heard, then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because in the next videos, we'll keep unearthing the truths you've always known, but no one has dared to speak. The shadow is not the end, it's only the beginning of the way back.